Hey everybody, welcome. As it's already getting dark, I think it's likely that my camera will select a codec that makes the picture a bit blurrier. But I'm pretty sure that most of the extremely few people who pay attention to my videos aren't particularly concerned with watching them, and more likely just listen to them, which is fine. Although I think at the same time there's a lot more bandwidth when we're able to see each other's faces, even though it's rather confusing to our bodies and probably our minds that the videos invert what I think we would see if we were face to face. So that what is on the right, now, okay, if we were face to face, what I see on the right is this side, or the left, of the person in front of me. But I think what we see on the videos is what I see on the right, which should be the other person's left, is actually the right. And for hundreds of thousands of years of human history and of living organismal history, this was impossible. There was no chance that that could possibly ever happen. Those two things could never get confused that way. There was no situation in which they could be thus confused. Now, someone could argue, well, there were mirrors. But we could only look at ourselves in a mirror. We couldn't really look at a person in front of us as though we were seeing them in a mirror. And so I suspect this has caused, along with many of the problems of our electronic situation, including the fact that if we are having a video conversation, for me to give someone my gaze, right, for me to meet their eyes, I have to look away from their image and my own image into a black thing at the top of my camera, like I'm doing right now. Which means that we cannot have eye contact, or even something that simulates it, in our electronic communications. And that is bizarre and troubling, and we should be very concerned about this kind of thing. However, the reasons we should be concerned aren't because we should be angry, and they aren't because we should be frightened. These two sort of, limbic system hacks that we're all being exposed to constantly by news and social media and similar things. Just a moment here. It's profitable, since attention has become the new money. Human attention, humans paying attention to things. It's profitable to go for the sort of low-hanging fruit, the stuff that's easiest to get. And it turns out that because of our evolutionary heritage and problems in modern and recent cultural an information, the evolution of culture and information, languaging, images, films, and so on, and the particular paths that were taken by our species and our societies in the possibility landscape, right? Of the entire possibility landscape, the specific choices that kept getting made over and over again and being doubled down on have resulted in a tree of catastrophes for human intelligence, social coherence, fulfillment, the possibility of having meaningful lives and relationships and so on, in a context that is almost completely counterfeited for the purpose of essentially triggering our nervous systems. And there's plenty of examples of this, but I don't want us to be angry or upset. I want us to be attentive and mindful. Because if we are mindful, then we can understand how these problems and situations evolved and why it was that the specific kinds of choices and developments within the possibility landscape were selected for and doubled down on and reselected for and so on recursively in a kind of strangely almost demonic or evil algorithm. Once we can understand this, we achieve the possibility of escaping it together, even if we only escape it in small, tightly knit groups or one-on-one, or even in our own minds. It's not really a useful goal to try to save the world. What we want to do, primarily because it's too broad a goal, what would be more useful is if we could develop small, highly effective, highly contagious forms of awareness, understanding, play, adventure, that granted us meaningful roles together that we could enact in our day-to-day lives, in our relationships, in our jobs, in media, that would lead us to the possibility of escape from the layered array of prisons that are otherwise certain to entrap us and future generations, not merely of human beings, but of all life on Earth. This kind of goal will not be accomplished by outrage. It will not be accomplished by finger pointing, accusation, determining who's got the privilege, who's the oppressor. None of that will help us. In fact, those particular goals and agendas, however seemingly noble their underlying structure may appear to us superficially, those goals are toxic, because punishing the oppressor is the opposite of dissolving the oppression, right? Replacing the oppression with something so beautiful and humane and intelligent that nobody is willing to stand aside from it, and everyone wants a piece of enacting that beautiful way of being human together. That's what the future, that's the kind and species and flavor of future we must work together for, if indeed we want a humane, intelligent future of equality and opportunity for all human beings and for all beings. Now, equality is a bizarre idea in and of itself, but I'm not going to attempt to take down that at the moment. It's a pretty low-hanging fruit. It's pretty easy to take that apart. There's no such thing as being born equal. No one is equal to any other human being. What we mean when we use the word equality, what we should be saying or hope to mean, is something more like not merely the freedom from the concern of being discriminated against for some particular feature of our appearance, ethnicity, gender identity, so on and so forth. But rather, what we want is equality of esteem and equality, or even something like equality isn't even the right goal. Celebration is the right goal, right? What we want is to be celebrated for the unique and personal aspects and assets that we bring to our humanity day to day, and the developmental possibilities. We want all of our developmental possibilities to be supported and nurtured and celebrated and rewarded. Now, this is an unlikely proposition for a number of reasons. There are reasons why we're in the situation that we're in now and have long been. There are important reasons why humans and even animals in nature that have no linguistic or conceptual culture nonetheless enact hierarchies. Some people have poorly made this argument, or made it in such a way that it's pretty easy to tear apart. I think Jordan Peterson is one of them. And some of my friends are very upset with me because I find him interesting. But I don't find people interesting. You know, Eric Weinstein uses a statement that I doubt he came up with, but it's a brilliant, or an idea. It's a brilliant idea. He's like, you don't go to a menu and you don't go to a restaurant and sign up for the whole menu, right? You order things that you like off the menu, and you eat those and enjoy them. And this is how it is with intelligent people that I pay attention to. There are things that Jordan Peterson has said that I find surprisingly unenlightened, so to speak. But there are many things and many positions that he holds that I think are profoundly worth listening to, and often, for me, quite edifying. Additionally, even if I disliked him as a human being, or if I disliked his agenda, or something like this, I would still have the presence of mind to pay close attention to him, so that I could understand why it is that I dislike him in a very detailed and developmentally useful way for my own mind, right? But my goal here is to say, like, with intelligent people, we don't sign up for the whole menu, right? We get to selectively relate with their presentations and their mind and their arguments and their positions and their perspectives, their dissertations, their lectures, their writings, and so on. And it's very important that we do so, because it's important that people do this with me. Even incredibly intelligent people have biases and get things wrong. And we don't want to be angry about their biases. We just want to understand how they came to those biases, and how we can diffuse the biases to get to higher ground together. That's the goal. Higher ground together. Getting there together. It's not going to be accomplished by getting pissed off. It's not going to be accomplished by finger pointing. It's not that certain forms of expose-like discussion and writing and consideration of histories and circumstances and situations, those can be important. But when the goal of those things is to vilify some specific class, person, gender, people, race, cohort, we're in trouble. We're in great danger at that point, because instead of establishing something better, we've decided to punish the oppressor. And punishing the oppressor is the wrong direction toward liberty, in my view. This isn't to say that there are no situations in which an oppressor or predator or opportunist should be punished. However, personally, I'm not a huge fan of the punishment idea. It seems like a lot of work for not much value. And it seems like we're going to create cohorts and involve them in torturing people who've made either intentional or unintentional mistakes or were ignorant. And that doesn't bode well for a future of enlightened humanity or society, in my view. I've never believed, I think prison is one of the dumbest things humans ever invented, and cages in general are a bad idea. But these are complex things. I'm laying these on the table far too simply. I could go into detail about these things, but that's not really my goal. And in fact, the reason that I'm on this topic is there was a film recently about social media and its dangers. I've been studying this for 15 years. Again, I have a model of something I call the knowledge amp that would invert most of the problems of the way that we're relating with electronic information in our time, and give us assets and access to forms of intelligence that are otherwise impossible for human beings to participate in. Doubt I'll ever get to make that. I'm a guy by myself out in the world with, 4 followers or something, right? So not likely that I'll suddenly make a bid to sell the idea to someone, and I don't really want to sell the idea to anyone because it's the kind of thing that has to be communally owned by the participants rather than being built by a corporation or funded by angel investors and so on. However, there was a recent video clip from, I think, Rebel Wisdom, in which Daniel Schmachtenberger, guy I appreciate a lot, threat analyst, brilliant, exemplary human being, in my view, was talking about how Facebook and social media, other social media corporations, are more powerful than governments, markets, and one other thing maybe religions. I can't remember the third thing. And I saw this coming like more than a decade ago. I knew that information was the new form of money and power, and particularly that the analytics produced by everyday human beings as they interact with electronic media are going to become the single most important commodity in the near-term future. And that means that those who control that commodity, especially if they are non-human simulated organisms, the things we call corporations, I call them para-human intelligence collectives. That's the most dangerous situation we could find ourselves in. I mean, we might as well just give everybody some uranium and have them, swallow a big pill of it or something. I mean, it's just completely fucking stupid. But again, being angry about it isn't the right move and won't help us. What we have to do is establish something better, right? In every case, instead of getting upset, we have to show the path toward the better thing. I saw someone saying some ridiculous finger-pointing nonsense on Facebook today, and a couple of people intelligently responded, let's stop yelling at look, once we've got an arrow through our heart, yelling at the people who fired it isn't going to help us. We need to help each other take the arrow out and maybe do something about these bows, right? So there's something very important about that idea. The people who were responding had realized that yelling at the perpetrator doesn't work, right? And in fact, not only exacerbates the problem of continuing to divide us as human beings, one from another, into tribal cohorts who, everybody but 3 other cohorts are the enemy. This is a future fraught with every kind of peril we cannot yet imagine. We must not go down this road. We must find better roads than this. So, I don't want us to be angry and outraged when we see wrongdoing. I want us to trace those diseases back to their origins, learn to understand what drove their enaction and development and embodiment, build another path in the possibility landscape, colonize that path with a few people so that they can exemplify the benefits and wonder and playfulness and hope and beauty of the new path, and thus make contagious adventuring systems that give us meaningful roles in our lives as human beings in the future, and for our children, and for our elderly, and for everyone. For everyone, right? It's only obvious that this is the right way to go, and that a future of endlessly more specific prosecutions, accusations, and exclusions leads to disaster. Although we are all in this together, all life is in this together. That's what it means to be on a tiny little floating drop of water in a void around a relatively benevolent sun, right? You're in this together. You can believe that shit. This is a very, very tiny and much smaller than it used to be context. It's smaller than it used to be for a weird reason. Humans have learned to cross all kinds of gaps, and to make new kinds of gaps and then cross them with machines. Instead of crossing gaps with love and interrelation, mutual concern, adoration, joy, education, and so on, we've decided to make a bunch of gaps that have to do with the haves and the have-nots, and pretend that people can cross those in essentially counterfeit ways using technologies and such. Lots of other things are going on, it's not the only thing. But my point here is weirder than what I started with. The reason that I was talking about the problems is just because I'd recently come across some clips, including the one with Daniel Schmachtenberger on Rebel Wisdom, about the dangers of social media. And long ago, during a long experience of unexpected insight and awareness, I discovered that life is a gap-crossing phenomenon. It does this really crazy stuff. It, first of all, crosses gaps that otherwise would seem impossible. And in case that's not obvious to you, just look at humans going to the moon, right? Or even traveling from Europe to the Americas. Now, of course, that kind of gap crossing was inspired by goals that I think we might reasonably understand to be malignant. People were looking for gold and commodities and things to support kingdoms and stuff. City builders, big mess, really bad idea. But in general, those humans were enacting what we can think of as a protocol or a property of life itself, right? Which is to span the gulf. And there's lots of different ways that this goes on. One of my friends, Ryan Firstdiver, who I'm very close with, he is a gap spanner guy. He's a bridge guy. So he's a bridge between what we might think of as, with some certain perspectives, what we might think of as white colonial peoples and the Blackfoot people. He's half Blackfoot, half colonial. So that puts him right in the middle already. He spans the gap between the rattlesnake population and the people of Lethbridge, Alberta, and he's an ambassador for the rattlesnakes. And so the snakes have come to know him as an ambassador, a person who stands between them and the people who might otherwise fear and or kill them. He rescues rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes are protected in Lethbridge, Alberta. He does this with other animals and birds and other living things and living places as well. So this is a guy who stands in the between of different forms of life as an ambassador and kind of as a buffer to keep damage from passing back and forth, right? To keep the rattlesnakes from biting the humans and to keep the humans from killing the rattlesnakes, even though, of course, the rattlesnakes are protected. And they're protected for very good reasons. Important reasons. Now, all of us in our lives, we cross gaps. Gaps between the real and the imaginary, the possible, the probable, the actual, between life and death, between waking and dreaming, between starvation and satiation, between love and hate. There are all these little gaps that we're constantly crossing, and in case it's not obvious, this crap we call electronic technology is a process that endlessly invents new gaps and new, mostly fake ways or toxic ways to cross them. And so our technologies are emulating this feature of our humanity that very few of us have ever had the opportunity to become aware of. I was noticing my friend's little child yesterday, who's 1 year old. And I was watching him greet various people who approached us, and I realized suddenly, oh my God, the little children see themselves as ambassadors in a way, right? And, you know, we can decide in different ways to talk about who and what they are the ambassadors of, but once they get a chance to master enough of using their new human body in their incarnation, they immediately sort of become ambassadors both from childhood to the adults and the other children around them, but also from the before of existence to embodied existence. They can still, we might imagine, remember the before of being human. And so they are ambassadors of the before and are greeting people joyfully to remind them of something that for most adults anyway, and many children, has long been lost in the developmental storms of, you know, getting older and becoming enlanguaged and the process of becoming enculturated, which are mostly processes of painting on occlusive layers of bullshit, ideas, concepts, words, nomenclature, knowledge forms, methods that effectively stifle and inhibit the entire possibility landscape of our developmental efflorescence, proclivities, precociousness, natural precociousness, and innate, anciently evolved intelligences that each of us is carrying. And we're not merely carrying them, we are each the unique ambassador of an array of relationships that modern human minds are too timid to conceive of and would actually be obliterated by even entertaining the possibility of their existence. What's actually going on in the universe are things so staggeringly profound that our wildest fantasies look timid and completely uncreative in the face of what they're standing in the way of us seeing, right? The nature of time-space and intelligence in time-space, what's actually going on here as living beings in living minds, is an adventure and like a fantasy story so astonishingly beautiful and profound that the sum of books that humans have ever written, the entire oeuvre of human ideation, is like a charred piece of gnat shit compared to what we're made of and what we're made to live and discover and become together. So we definitely don't want to trade our innate birthrights away for endlessly mass-produced counterfeits and fantasy stories that, while reminiscent of something within us, do not deliver that something into our direct experience, do not recover it to our direct access and relation, understanding, awareness, and embodiment. We are gap crossers, and everything in life is like this. The gap between one heartbeat and the next, this breath and the next one, the first one and the last one, and so on. The gap between me and my beloved, those who I would adore and those who I would oppose. All of these gaps, if you look carefully at what life is doing and you try to find out what's one of the most fundamental ways to understand what organisms are up to, this idea of inventing and crossing gaps to produce developmental possibilities that were previously unthinkable is one of the simplest, most profound, and most universal things we might perceive or that might come into our awareness when beginning to ask this question. With passion and curiosity and authenticity and sincerity, if we're asking the question with deep integrity. So, now it's pretty dark. And I've covered some of the terrain that I was hoping to cover, particularly the terrain related to the topic of crossing gaps. And, you know, I began in light and I will end in darkness. And there's an example of crossing a gap. Think of all the different ways humans want to fill time, right? So them watching shows or listening to podcasts or, you know, doing chores or whatever it is they're doing, all of these are ways of productively, quote unquote, navigating what we think of as a span of time. And it's interesting that we use this language. It's not accidental. So now that it is dark, and I have a few other gaps to cross before I get home, I will thank you for joining me and wish you all insight, good rolls, wonder, enthusiasm, fascination, love, joy, and the blessings of success in all the aspects of your day, world, life, and relationships. Bye-bye for now. See you soon, I hope.